I want to welcome everyone in. Very excited to be here. And I'm sure we're going to have even more people join us in the next few minutes as we're 3 minutes in. Um, I'm very excited to be here. Leo, I am the CEO at Grip Security, and today we're talking about managing SaaS identity risks in post-merger IT integrations. We have an amazing panel for the day. People who acquired company, acquiring company, investing in company, got acquired, all of the different types of personas and companies, and lots of people with lots of experience. So I'm very, very excited to introduce our panelists for today. And maybe Gary, you can start by quickly introducing yourself, kind of around the room, and we can then kick it off.
Yeah, I'm Gary Hayslip. I'm the CISO at SoftBank. I am not a celebrity CISO like Andy Ellis.
Sonia, you want to go?
Yes, Senor Rista, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer of Signify Health, a newly anointed CVS Health Spire company.
Yeah, so it wasn't clear, Sonia just got acquired. The company just got acquired by CVS.
Last May, yes.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you.
Sam?
Yeah, I'm Sam Curry. I'm the CISO, CISO at Zscaler, but I've been in the industry for 30 years, and I have acquired or been acquired 14 times, including a CTO at RSA. I was Chief Security Architect at McAfee and head of product at CA, all cyber acquisitions. So happy to talk about it.
Amazing. Our celebrity CISO, Andy.
I'm Andy Ellis. Not sure where the celebrity CISO came in, but it was in our show notes. So I'm an operating partner at Wild Ventures, former CISO at Akamai, and an inductee into the 2021 CISO Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Last but not least, James.
Howdy, James Fritz. I'm the CISO here at NFB.
And maybe share a bit about your relations to acquisitions.
Yeah, sure. So kind of one of the big touching points in the acquisition world from an NFP perspective is a slow year is about 30 acquisitions for us. We're usually sitting around about 40 to 50 acquisitions that we do per year. So very heavy in the acquiree space.
Yeah, thank you, James. Maybe to start off the conversation, my first question to the panel today would be, when do CISOs get involved in M&A transactions? What's the right time, and what's the actual time when they get involved? I'm not sure they are the same one. And
we're all smiling
maybe
at this one. We're all smiling at this
you can start, Sam.
So generally not early enough is what I would say. Probably the hairiest one I did was at NetScout, acquired 4 different business units on the same day, one of which was Arbor. And my biggest worry was that we were an anti-DDoS company and that we would be DDoSed on that first day. So we actually got permission to meet 2 weeks ahead of time, which was a big deal in order to look at risks and to make sure that each of the entities, because they were separate business entities, each of them had the ability to withstand DDoS attack. But it was not about just comparing control sets. It was like, what were the risks of each entity? And I think that'll be a theme that recurs here. So I'll just start by saying not soon enough is probably, and I'd love to hear what others think, especially in different verticals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead, Gary.
I'll say no. I'm saying when I was at Webroot, when I was a CISO at Webroot, we got acquired, which is how I ended up being at SoftBank. And I remember the acquisition was kind of brewing and going on behind the scenes for months before I actually finally got brought in, to go ahead and work with, the onboarding CISO that would be taking over my team and taking over our ISO certifications and our GDPR certifications and stuff. And we were kind of brought in, late, at the end. And I always wish that we'd have had, several months more time to talk, to work out the transition and the stacks and how our teams were going to work together as we transitioned and everything. It was really late in the day when I got involved on that one.
And maybe how long was the process after you got involved? How long were you guys in bed together trying to merge the teams?
I'd say about 5 months. And
this
then
this was Carbonite, right? This was
this one Carbonite. That was when you remember I was talking to you about that at the time, because Carbonite was in Boston company, and they bought Webroot, and I moved over to the product side, and then I got drafted by SoftBank.
I think in my experience, the higher the stakes from a compliance perspective in terms of the industry vertical that you're in, the more transparent you really need to be about the risks that exist, because they may have material effect on the price. Actually, I'm really glad that back in 2017, when I was consulting for Nuance Communications, they were averaging about 3 or 4 acquisitions a month, and we defined a process. It looked a lot like a third-party risk management process, except the questions were a little bit different, a little bit deeper. And then, at the end of my tenure there, going into 2018 or so, the investment bankers and others that were involved in the due diligence process directly started acknowledging that security needed to be at the table a lot sooner, and that it wasn't sufficient just to have sort of the CIO at the table talking about IT strategic alignment.
Yeah. We've actually seen things like, if you look back at Yahoo, where security incidents were material and nearly derailed. I think you were kind of alluding to that, Sonia, right? And this notion that what we talk about can derail an acquisition is very real. But if you think about it, once it's in motion, a lot of folks don't realize that the people who are involved in it can actually lose their jobs if it goes wrong. When CA bought Integrity, a number of us were parked in a room and told, okay, 90 days till this thing closes, and if it doesn't, you're looking for new jobs.
Wow.
Right? So yeah, that was back in the day, right? We're talking nearly 20 years ago. Most folks don't remember that, but it was like, because you were competitors prior to the acquisition, you now are privy to information that if it doesn't work, you can't work here anymore. When we did the NetScout thing I mentioned earlier, we were able to say, look, what we're doing is about aligning the ships, and it doesn't have anything to do with the product portfolio. And that was different in cyber than it was in the core than in the product set, which is what Gary was talking about.
Right.
So I'm interested because I think there's a common theme where it seems that the CISO is involved too late in the process, or could be involved too late. Is there time to derail an acquisition, or is it? And James, maybe I will send it to you. What's the right time to get involved so you don't derail an acquisition, or you do derail it if you need to? And then with the challenge that often you get access to some of the resources you need after the papers were signed. How does it affect what you can do post an acquisition or before an acquisition occurs?
It has to re-echo everything that everybody said. It's never early enough, but I think it's working hand in hand with the M&A team and having them kind of sell the expectation of what day 0 looks like, day plus 1, 2, 3, as it moves forward. And that even though this acquired entity is making whatever on their multiples, they may be paying out significantly, because with every acquisition, it's not you're acquired, you're integrated. There's the delta there. And depending on the risk that's identified and how big it is, the delta could shrink or it could grow. And so just having the M&A team kind of forecast and set expectations appropriately so that they say, hey, you guys might not be good enough. You may be, but you might not be. And if you're not, congratulations, you're going to be eating the cost of upgrading from a business premium Microsoft license to an E5, or you may be buying more Fortinet firewalls or Palo Alto firewalls or whatever it is, but also helping them along the journey, because you don't want to go through 2 different changes for them. You want to kind of help roadmap them. But if they're not expecting it, and then you go to that managing director who's just acquired, like, you're not getting anywhere fast. So it's really working with the M&A team and making sure that they're selling what they're actually being bought into, so the expectations are set day 1 and everybody knows what's expected.
Thank you. I want to move to my next question, Andy, starting with you. What are the CISO challenges in an M&A transaction?
Well, I think
things that are hard to do.
Yeah, well, I think the most important challenge is to understand, like, what is actually mission critical. If you're on either side, either being acquired or acquiring, like, what needs to be preserved. A great example is IT infrastructure in most companies doesn't need to be preserved. Like one of the things we did at Akamai, literally day one, we closed, we showed up with brand new laptops for every employee in the company because we were going to throw out their entire corporate infrastructure. Now that worked in 99% of acquisitions, but there was one that was like, oh, hey, we did this acquisition, and it turns out their entire billing system was embedded into their corporate IT infrastructure. So we were going to have to spend time disentangling that. So it wasn't this easy, like, hey, just throw it out. And that's, I think, the most important thing is what really is critical. And coming back to sort of James's point, I guess your previous question about what can derail this. Like, I always like to ask that question of the M&A team, is to say, look, we're going to go due diligence. We're going to find a lot of risks. What is your threshold for risk on this? Like, what is the sort of thing that would derail the deal? And oftentimes there is no answer for that. And so that's a really important thing to understand is like, what would actually make this deal fail and what makes it succeed so that you can align your organization to do the right thing. Like if you're doing an acquisition that is a tech tuck-in, odds are nothing's going to derail that acquisition. So don't spend your time trying to hunt for the deal killer. Spend your time trying to hunt for what will make this deal as successful as possible. If you're doing a purchase of a competitor, there's a lot of things that can kill that deal. So you'd better go looking for them quickly so that you can get past that and get on to how do we make this as successful as possible.
Yeah. What would be actual, pitfalls or things that people could do wrong from a security perspective in an M&A deal?
Oh, I think my biggest one was contracts. The number of security terms in contracts that startups would sign to that are just crazy. And so we would literally go through and have a contract specialist find every term that we were not going to accept out of their customer base.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, Andy. That was the biggest chasm of, existing policies that were reasonable and within the confines of what you could sort of execute upon operationally. And the smaller companies or big software development firms that are like their speed to go to market is such that they just redlining was just rampant in all of the variations of their contracts.
An issue we ran into when I was at Webroot, we also acquired about 6 or 7 companies when I was there. And they had a habit of, we're going to go ahead and acquire the company. We're going to go ahead and bring them to be part of our platform. And we'll look at integrating their stacks later. And I was like, no, that's not a good idea, because you end up having these islands of incompetence or these islands of legacy technologies that you're going to have to address them sooner or later. And after several years, it got to the point to where, they actually had dev teams that still didn't believe they were part of the company because they were still running on their old hardware. They were still running on their old stuff. They'd never been fully integrated. And we ended up having to do a walkabout, myself and the COO and a couple of the other executives, got a bunch of plane tickets and started traveling all over Europe to all the different offices to sit down, have lunch with these people, talk to them. And over a 6-month period, we absorbed all the technology stacks and fully integrated them. And it's just one of those things that I get it. They're going to be a kind of a separate business entity. So we're going to let them kind of run by themselves for a while and we'll address it later. That's not really a good idea. I mean, if they're going to be part, bite that bullet and just go ahead and do it. Start looking at how you're going to start integrating those technologies in one family, get people together.
Yeah.
By the way, I had a manager years ago, a boss who said I kept trying to make an acquisition happen because I've been on both. I've always been in cyber companies except for one time, and I've been on the business side. I've been on the practitioner side, and my boss said, "Hey, you can strap 2 drunks together, but don't expect them to walk a straight line." And what he was telling me was, when you buy 2 companies, just because you've done this perfect match of what they have and what we have, don't expect it to be the sum of their best parts. And I mentioned that they were cyber companies because like I would always be playing this, cyber, quarterbacking and like trying to figure out the perfect angle for the markets. And it was very rarely about putting the best portfolios together. What usually would go wrong was cultural mismatches, not having thought through the go-to-market partnerships correctly. There's so much more than just, there's an I and an A, and now we have an IAM solution, right? Or, this endpoint suite is now perfect. I think Gary, you went through that, right? And so how
Yep.
do you match these up, and only like maybe 1/5 of it was what you thought it was when you played that strategic game in your head. And how did the cultures come together? Because very often you bring this stuff in and you say, okay, now CISO of the combined entity. Once you've played the Highlander, there can be only one thing. Once you play that game, you're like, so you're going to use all this, and they're like, no, why would I use that? I've been against this the whole time. Or you get that sort of passive aggression. So it is about the plan of record being correct, that you've really thought through the PMI. And for those, a couple times I heard people say we did like 3 at in a year, or we did like 10 in a year or whatever. It becomes a reflex in many cases. And so knowing what you get out of it and what you're going to be held accountable to, and then making sure there's buy-in from all those various departments, it's huge. And it's not just, oh yeah, look, chocolate and peanut butter, it's going to be great. No, sometimes the worst of it combines.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I love this perspective because I think one of the challenges, and that's together with being involved after the decision was made, being involved too late, is that it's kind of hard to know what you're walking into. And maybe, James, I'd love to ask you, how do you know what risks is the business taking from an IT perspective? They need to embed things in. From a business perspective, by acquiring another company, how do you prepare for that once you're brought into the conversation?
Well, I don't think you'll ever be fully prepared. I mean, ideally, you'd have all the time in the world. Your due diligence would be perfect. Your due diligence window would be huge. But that's never the case. It's always Johnny and Susie who know the answers, who know about the skeleton in the closet, and they're always on sabbatical during the last half of the due diligence. And so you end up acquiring this company, and you're aware of what you can mitigate. You're aware of what you're willing to accept, what you can eliminate. But I think kind of the idea of risk transference becomes so huge with acquisitions, because not only are you aware of their state, but what if they got breached the week before you even started talking to them, and now that baggage is coming with them? That's congratulations, now your baggage, right? So an escrow account or something simple like that can be so profound, where you say, hey, this is your buyout. We're taking 5%, 10%, whatever it is, based upon the overall risk appetite and what identified risk about the known knowns versus the unknown unknowns. And you set that aside for 3 years and say, congratulations, this is just sitting here, you can get it in 3 years. But if something happens that's attributable to you or your entity, that's where we're paying out of. That we're not going to accept all the risk. You have to be aware that this company that you've run for 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is before acquisition, it's potentially bad. And so risk transference can be huge, because you'll just never know. It's impossible to know every risk that exists.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the insight here. And you mentioned this, baggage that you're buying. I'm sure it comes with a IT baggage as well. The business that you're buying is based on technologies that some of them you can immediately transfer, but some of them are core to the continuity of the business. You cannot just lift and shift the code from AWS to your Azure tenant. You cannot change your entire CI/CD pipeline in a day. So maybe my question now would be, how do you know what this baggage is? And second, what do you do with it then?
Yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sonia.
Go ahead, James. It's fine.
I'll just talk quickly then, so Sonia can more eloquently say what I'm going to say, because I'm going to say the same thing, so I'll let her say it. No, I think just identifying and prioritizing is the biggest thing. If it's a Grammarly plugin or something silly that just makes life a little bit easier, it's one less click. Those are the things you may not care about. But at the end of the day, if it's a 2002 server that runs their billing and everything else, and it's totally secure, don't worry about it, like that needs to be prioritized. That's a huge issue. That's a huge problem. So really just sitting down and prioritizing is the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I was thinking of, I like to use the term kind of shallow SaaS portfolio versus deep SaaS, right? And the deep SaaS stuff, I care about access management. I care about how it's distributed within the product environment. If it's a software development company, how close it is to engineering, in terms of how disruptive it's going to be to look at, and inspect kind of either replacements or, trying to right size some of the security deficiencies. The shallow SaaS, a la the shadow IT SaaS platforms that, marketing maybe has gotten, or advertising has gotten. Not that they're not a problem, because we've seen in recent news reports that sometimes those are the gotchas. But for the most part, relying on some outside, entities to give you a reasonable idea of what type of risk those SaaS applications kind of fall into the category of, so that you can focus on things that are more impactful from your direct revenue generating course of operations within the business. I think kind of makes sense just as a first pass.
I'd add a few things. So I'm going to say something maybe a little politically incorrect. I have a saying with my team I often use: FIDO, F it, drive on. So we get to a point where we've risk quantified as much as we can, and then the unexpected happens. So we have like a war room, and so we just deal with the risks we didn't see coming. I remember on one occasion, the second thing is we always keep a reserve from a financial perspective to deal with the unforeseen, and I mean for incentives. So because very often you put these retainers in place for key personnel and they're just writing them out. And so an instance of that was we had an acquisition, and you could tell that's what was happening. And, once you've negotiated to a certain point that the people aren't incented, why do you bother? So let's assume that they have okay incentives, but now they're writing out the last few months. And I remember sitting in a room saying, and there was a lot of hostility between, quote, two parties. We really hadn't become one company. And I said, folks, is this divorce court or couples counseling? Like, what are we doing here? And it was one of those moments where you knew that the company was either going to fail to succeed or was going to succeed. And everybody really thought about it and they wanted it to succeed. But we had that reserve. So we not only could get them to commit emotionally for the right moral and social reasons, but we could back it up, and we could deploy some assets to actually incent people financially correctly. So if we hadn't had that as something like 5 to 10% of what the incentives that were planned for the deal available, we wouldn't have had the flexibility about 12 to 16 months in to be able to redeploy. And then we would have been hosed. And it made all the difference in the world. And FIDO is a fun term.
I love that term, Sam. I think there's a really key point, which is who actually owns each of these risks, whether it's a business risk, a security risk, like who actually owns it? Because all too often in our early days, we saw this a lot, that we would come in, we were so excited, we got to be part of diligence. We would create this master list of like every possible risk. We'd rank order them. And then the acquisition would happen, and that spreadsheet just sat sitting somewhere on a drive, and nobody ever looked at it again, because the M&A team did not actually own the execution. So we would deliver it to them, and they're like, okay, great. Do any of these block the deal? No, they're all manageable. Okay, good. And then they would go on, and it's like, okay, now who's managing these risks? Right? Some of them were ours, but most of them weren't. And so it became this really interesting challenge to figure out, which are the ones that you just F it and move on, and which are the ones that you're like, no, somebody actually has to own this post-integration. Like, and some of them are easy, like the shallow SaaS. Yes, marketing has 1 billion SaaS applications. On one hand, you're going to have a combined CMO at some point, and the combined CMO will kill off half of those applications. So you can kind of defer some of it, but not all of it.
My experience with CMOs is that they're going to combine them and use more SaaS.
That's been my experience too.
Yeah, they'll only get rid of 30% of it, but like they're going to combine the two social media management platforms. Like that's going to come together. The social media team is going to say, great, we'd have twice as many accounts, but we don't want twice as many platforms to manage our accounts. So we'll pull that together. But look at this great design platform. We're going to add that into our stack.
Yeah. Sonia said something interesting about the shadow IT in the business you're buying, and I'm interested because they can definitely don't report about their shadow IT. Once you buy an organization, it becomes your shadow IT. How do you deal with it through an acquisition? And SaaS applications just present a really good example to it, because they're not necessarily tied to the infrastructure. when Andy comes in and turns off all the servers in the server room, the SaaS apps stay active. So they kind of join the new company as a SaaS baggage when you acquire. And I'm interested in how it affects an acquisition. How do you manage identities and people leaving during an acquisition, especially when there's a potential for the access to what you just bought being open through SaaS apps and other types of IT. And Gary, I think we haven't heard you in a while, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, mine, I'm in a little different situation. Like, at SoftBank, we're 100% SaaS. So I don't have any on-prem servers or any data centers. I've got 300 plus SaaS apps that we're trying to manage. The interesting thing for us that we've had to adjust to when we totally rebuilt all of the infrastructure and the stack back in 2019 when we stood up the Vision Fund and the company started scaling was we made a cultural decision across the board that each app had to be owned by somebody. And it doesn't mean IT and information security. And so, in Jira, in our inventory for our portfolio of all the SaaS apps that we have, there are actual names assigned. There's business owners assigned, and if we're using Grammarly, we're going to go ahead and use the enterprise version of it. There's going to be a license associated with it. Somebody's paying for it, and then what we do is of the 300 apps, there's about 15, roughly about 15 to 20 that are considered to be critical because there's financial data or PII data or something like that. And we get in our 5 regulators that we deal with are tied into one of those 15 apps. And so those I monitor heavily. I audit them heavily. I keep, the latest SOC 2, the latest bridge letters. I make sure that the business owners track those, who's using them, and because I have to prove it when I'm talking to my auditors. Now, the other 285, once a year, the business owners get a Jira ticket that says, hey, go ahead and do a quick, user audit, do a quick, audit with procurement as to how it's being paid for, and we've just basically put together a process to track them and to manage them. But we made it from the beginning that there was not going to be any orphan apps. We were not going to deal with that risk. If we're going to be, cloud first and everything was going to be associated with SaaS apps, somebody's going to have to be in charge of them. Somebody's going to have to manage them. And then that, and making that decision also directed the stack, the tools that I selected so that I could have tools that would give me that visibility to be able to track, to be able to go ahead and pull reports as to, apps that weren't, in our portfolio, apps that weren't designated as being approved, so that I could go ahead and track down and find out why they were being used and tell these people, hey, no. You've got to run it through the tech review process. Somebody's got to have budget for this, and no, it's not IT, and so it's become a an enterprise process for us on how we manage our SaaS apps.
Lior, so I should mention, by the way, first of all, I have tools in my company, and you have Grip as well is relevant here, but we play in markets where we have competitors that also fulfill some points I'm about to make. So this is not about my tools versus my competitors or yours versus your competitors. So I'm just going to say that not all risks are created equal. And so there were some that we know were focused on big rocks, and because we can't do all of them all at once, and nor should we try. But the other thing is that, for instance, I'll mention your products because you're probably not going to, but having, for instance, a good handle on identity and using that as a control plane, right? So is there an identity strategy in place? That's huge thing to do. Zero trust. All right. My company does zero trust, but having a zero trust strategy and having, for instance, access to a CASB and that sort of thing is a big deal for being able to take disparate infrastructures and make them work together. My competitors do similar things. So I would not approach this without strategies in either of those. The same thing applies to endpoint, right? And so these are the big rocks that I would go after. But once you actually can get like a shadow IT report, not only do I go after what are the big things to resolve and make sure that they're right. Have you made good decisions on the big services? I also then look at the little teeny ones, right? So what are the odd person out services that this company is using that only a few people are using and are categorized as high risk? So any decent zero trust, service in CASB is going to have a report about what are the shadow AI services or shadow IT services. And I started thinking about AI all the time now, right? So what are the shadow IT services that are out there? Find the outliers that are high risk with a few users. Why? Right? Those are the ones that you want to start, looking for, because you're not going to have like 60 insiders in your company, right? You're going to have 2 or 3 who are trickling data out. And they're really going to be, if they are selling data or if they're working for a foreign power or what have you, or for cybercrime, now's when they're going to be really leveraged during that acquisition, if they weren't already, which is already a realized risk. And so I mentioned identity and a few other game-changing big rocks, but you really want to look at those shadow IT services and look at those outliers with only a few users that have a high ability to either exfil or get to critical data.
Yeah, and certainly I'd love to ask you what, and Sam, I completely agree with you. As a vendor that has competitors that do the same thing, the ability to gain visibility during an M&A transaction helps a lot in understanding what you're buying. But Sonia, I'm interested, what do you do when the company you're buying don't have the sufficient tools to have this visibility? How can you, as an acquirer, enforce a policy or make sure you gain the visibility yourself?
Yeah, well, you can propose contingencies, right, within the sale that you run X, Y, and Z, for, 30, 60, 90 days. Maybe even in the due diligence process, if you're lucky, right? If you return that data, and do this under, legal guidance and what have you. But if you're really starting from scratch, I mean, there really are a plethora of tools now that'll go in and give you a good idea of the portfolio or the profile. I mean, MDM's sort of old school, but it's still pretty good for going and tracking what actually is installed on assets. The network, it's a little bit easier with network access control tools. It'll tell you, the various appliances and aged and out of OS and all of those types of things. So. I might have just lost power. Sorry, I went dark here. Or maybe I'm not moving around too much.
We can still hear you.
So you still have tools at your disposal to do that are very low cost. I think to enter into discussions and say that you don't have the financial means to utilize some very baseline tools to get inspection if you need to, that's not going to really hold water if something bad comes out of the other end of that deal. So I think it's good. They're commoditized. You can pick what works for you, or maybe you can just do it as a service, which is another good way if you don't want to make a lot of investment.
Yeah. I think a key thing that underlies something both Sonia and Sam just talked about is understanding sort of your entire IT profile. I actually hate the term shadow IT because it puts the blame in the wrong spot. The reason shadow IT exists is because IT chooses not to support the business, and the business goes and does something.
Or does it worse. It does it worse.
That's absolutely true. But as CISOs, like, we all have jobs because of the shadow IT. Like, the CISO career field is just a response to IT not being responsible for systems. Somebody had to secure them. We did, and we got C-level titles out of doing that. Great for us, bad for the businesses long term. So when you're applying yourself, you can't say, well, that's shadow IT. No, that's IT that is just not currently supported. But it's still my problem to deal with, whether it's the phone that I'm asking people to pay for themselves and access all my data on, whether it's that, that whatever the SaaS service is that we only have one account on because we didn't want to pay for enterprise.
And everybody's sharing the account.
And everybody's sharing the account. Like, you name it, all of these things that are all at the edge case are simply because we didn't want to support those as businesses, but the business needed it. So somebody went and did something.
It's funny, Andy. Yeah. I've always said that we only have the job because somebody didn't do something like identity management right or logs right, and never because of services. But yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
Right. If the
So I'm gonna,
CIOs had said we own all of this, then
yeah.
CISOs would obviously just work for the CIO.
I have to play devil's advocate on this one a little bit, because from what I've seen, the CIOs have been underwater with the business prioritizing go-to-market strategies related to product development or what have you. And they're just trying to get the right tools to the right people. But they've grown, I mean, they grew at such capacity that they were just overwhelmed and kind of said, whoop, you know, the ship's sailing without me.
Right.
Let me just hang on to the helm, right?
Oh, they're absolutely the
The
80-20
other thing
rule
I
in
would caution
practice.
against is you want to be careful when you're coming into these M&A situations and your security and asking and starting to impart policy and configuration. You don't want to step into that policing tool, you know, moniker. That's the big gotcha, right? So you really have to do this in conjunction with your partnerships in the business in a way that doesn't put you in perpetuity being this person that approves exceptions all the time, which is not what you want for your security program.
Absolutely. Can you figure out how to do the acquisition and make the acquired company employees say, oh, thank goodness we got it bought by a mature organization? Like when I was at Akamai, like our zero trust approach was really simple. Every device had a cert on it. Everybody had Duo on their phones, and we didn't use passwords. So when you logged into something, like your web browser said, oh, hi, I'm Andy Ellis's computer, and Andy Ellis's phone got a push, and I would authenticate. People who got acquired were like, wait, I don't have to type in my password on 75 million websites. This is
Andy,
great.
Andy, this is where you reach your celebrity status. So I haven't had anybody roll out the red carpet for me yet, but if I get that to that level, I'm definitely going to be in the celebrity status.
That's where it feels great. Like, can you do this? And then when you're tracking down and hunting down the shadow IT that's still out there, people don't view you as coming to kill it. You're coming to enable them to do their job easier and more securely. And sometimes you're going to pick one or the other, but usually you can actually do both.
Yeah, two interesting terms pushed by Gartner. One of them pushed by Gartner. The first one is business-led IT. The new definition for shadow IT. It's no longer something you need to eliminate. It's something you need to support. Well, the business, and Sonia, exactly as you said, the business has needs and they want to fulfill them. Sometimes IT doesn't move at the same pace as they do, and they have to do things outside of existing policy. If we're only there to just give them exceptions all the time, then we're not needed at all. The second one, which I think is brewing and is more interesting, is BYOA, bring your own application. And the next generation of BYOD, well, we kind of expect our employees to source their own tools. It's no longer IT that's expected to tell them what to use. They need to come to us and ask for approval, but they choose what they use themselves. And just with the barrier of adoption being kind of a sign-up form with all of those SaaS solutions, it's easier for them to just go and do it. By the time they come in and ask for approval, if they even do, the business has already invested 200 hours, 300 hours into using the tool itself. Obviously, in an M&A scenario, we have the same problem where they're deep into using the tool. But I'm interested in your view around it. What's the right way to manage that? And in case you're merging two companies and need to say no to things because that's part of merging the IT infrastructure, how do you do it in a way where people are happy about it instead of frustrated about it?
I have a few ideas there. So I'll throw it out while people think, because I sense that people are thinking about too much right now. So one is, I think it has to be more than authentication. It has to be authorization. And we've lionized strong authentication far too much. I think this is an authorization decision. That's the other part of zero trust. Also, API security is really important. And being able to, we've talked about SBOM a lot in the last few years, right? Secure bill of materials, as if that's the end. And I think it's really just the beginning, right? So it's how do you do a catalog, and then how do you investigate the web of connections, especially services connections and API connections, and what are the entitlements that then chain off of those? And there are tools for that. Then how do you instead of saying no, you say yes, but this is the way that you do it? Or how do you then create processes to be able to onboard those? You can't just say any app can come through the door and just hang it on the tree here. Instead, what we're saying is this is the way that you do it, and the conditions under which it has to work within the infrastructure, which is about posture. And it's about what is the potential for infection, or what are the vectors that come through those things, and to what degree do I want to authorize the notion of an app segment it can exist, right? What other apps can it talk to? What workloads can it talk to? What clouds can it exist in? And so that's a more mature thing than just bring your own app. It's bring your own app under these conditions in this environment with this framework around it. I'll stop there because it does open a ton of stuff, and I can see a couple of other CISOs nodding, especially our celebrity CISO. So yeah.
Well, I think the one of the big challenges here is going to be with generative AI showing up. There's now a whole bunch of things that weren't actually SaaS services. They were mechanical Turks. Like, think about slide design. You would send out your request for slides to be designed, and it would go off to some, low cost center somewhere, in East Asia. It would take you a couple days. You'd get it back. You'd do iterations, and the business controlled it. because it was expensive, because doing a slide deck would cost like $1,000, which isn't actually that much, but it's still considered expensive. We're almost at the point, we're not really there yet, where you can use Gen AI to create your slide decks. There's some early startups there. I haven't been totally in love with any of them. If you're one of them and you want to convince me otherwise, let me know. But this now personal productivity, like as somebody who has spent their whole career making slides, like I would absolutely have been the first one on board with, I'm going to go get that whether you like it or not.
But by the way, this is a great model, because when we were Mechanical Turkey, we were making the same kinds of trust decisions, but with people on the other end who were, by the way, sources of leak, but they were leak in a world we understood, and we could put frameworks that we accepted, even if they weren't trustable. We could say, we understand background checks, whether or not they work, and we understand who we can hold accountable. We're still getting to understand who are the people that are hosting these devices and these applications. What do they tie into? We went through this with search engines. We went through this with clouds. That doesn't mean we just replicate it. We've got to go through the maturity pains to get there. And that means business maturity pains as well as technical ones. But it's a great analogy, because we do this in the carbon world. We're learning how to do it in a faster silicon world now with new players.
Right. And the difference is that for me to get a personal account, like with, say, ChatGPT-4, that's $200 a year. Like, I'm just going to go do that because that's easy for me to do, whether it's a business or personal account. And that's what we have to accept that our employees are going to be doing. And we have to make the friction cost of doing it the right way something commensurate with, we're spending $200 on this.
Yeah, I would just like to add to this particular stream of discussion that terms and conditions and the acceptance of terms and conditions on behalf of an enterprise is a dangerous minefield. And it just so happens that we haven't had many high profile, liability cases that call, that a small SaaS provider is calling up our T's and C's and say, oh yeah, but we told you so, right? It's happened on the grander scale with Microsoft and ChatGPT. And it's like, well, if anything you send us to, by the way, we're going to make a copy and keep it. So read the fine print, I guess, is the only thing that I have to add there. And I think a lot, and maybe it's because I'm in healthcare, highly regulated, super compliant space, that I think a lot about the variable terms and conditions that employees are signing on my behalf, not only the technology itself that's sort of outside of the confines of what's expected.
Yeah. James, what are your thoughts on shadow IT, business-led IT?
Yeah, I think, everybody's been saying it, removing as much friction as possible, but I think removing as much dollar at the table as possible is a huge thing too, because, we use a chargeback model, and chargeback model gets you everything under this umbrella. But if you want extra things, you're paying the dollar yourself. That business unit's going above and beyond, and they're paying for the licensing, they're paying for all that. Now, it may be completely new generative AI, crazy technology that doesn't exist, or it may be one of the 30 million PDF readers and they get just a small bit of functionality. But I think bringing the business to the table and saying, hey, you want to license this stuff, that's great. Here's the steps, Sam had talked through, these are the things you need to do for bringing your own application. But when you get to that final point, like us as an enterprise, which is significantly larger than you as a business line, we can go to the negotiation table and we can say, this is what we want with our tenfold number of users because we can expand this to more than just your business line. So not only are they seeing just a general reduction in the overall licensing cost that they would be paying, but they don't have to worry about it anymore. Now it's, I don't know why this isn't working. They reach out to the service desk and service desk, I don't know what that is. It's now, I don't know why this is working. And there's a technical owner and a business owner, and that technical owner can then say, let me sign in as an admin. Let me figure out what's going on. Oh, this thing was flipped. Let me flip it back. So trying to alleviate a billing licensing perspective, and then just trying to let the business know if we know about it, if we own it, we're the ones who are going to fix it for you. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just a ticket away now.
Now that we're 2 minutes over time, I want to ask my last question, which is one tip for security within an acquisition in under 5 sentences from each of you. And Gary, maybe you can start. What's your number one tip to someone either being acquired or acquiring a company? Do you want them to listen to?
Ask questions. I think my biggest thing is ask the question. I can't count the number of times I've been in where we were doing stuff. I just had that bad feeling that something just wasn't right. We're collecting the documentation, and I just knew I was missing something, and I just don't worry about it. And then we find out later, oh, we missed this, or oh, they were doing this and nobody knew about it, and they kind of kept it under wraps. If you are in the middle of an acquisition, you're supposed to be talking with your counterparts, you're supposed to be working with them, you're documenting, you're collecting information. And if you've got that feeling, trust yourself. I mean, trust that you're going to go ahead and run into things that just are not going to pass the smell test, and you should be able to reach out and ask people questions and ask for help. Trust yourself to go ahead and be asking those questions. Don't just assume it's going to work itself out.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. Andy?
I always like to ask people when I want to learn about risk. I usually just say, what's the biggest thing that you're like wonder why you've never fixed? In an acquisition, it's harder to ask that question, so I like to pivot it to, what's the biggest security thing that you are looking forward to us fixing for you post-acquisition?
Thank you. Sonia?
I like that a lot. Yeah, I would say share. And I would say, remember your collaborative and inclusive vocabulary when you're talking through these areas. Recognize that everybody has their deficiencies, programs that are a different state of maturity. The state of maturity of the program you're looking at may not be representative of the CISO that's only been in there 3 or 4 months. So always use the utmost respect, but be inquisitive and be transparent.
Yeah. James?
Kind of echoing what Gary said, and then just Sonia wrapped up with, it's about asking the questions, but it's also about asking the questions in the right way to the right people. You may not have a counterpart. It may be an MSSP who's doing something, and you're talking to a COO, and if you're out there asking, highly technical questions, they're going to say, oh yeah, that rings a bell. It sounds familiar. And then you're going under a false pretense of this acquisition. So, making sure you're asking the questions appropriately to who you're talking to, because if they come back and they say, I don't know, okay, well, that's a delta, that's a gap right there that needs to be addressed by somebody.
Sam?
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat anything anyone else said because they said it really well, and there's several points I would have made there. But one I'm going to say is perfect is the enemy of the good. I think you need to just get started and get going. And the only other thing to add is I've never seen a security program that didn't have something to offer in a merger. Meaning it's not just we're better coming to acquire you. If you approach with that attitude, they're going to be like, who are you? And get off your high horse. There's always something in the acquired entity to improve the acquirer's security as well. And going in there and really having the attitude that you're looking for it and you want it does an awful lot to win hearts and minds. And fundamentally, we said a lot about what the CISO job is and isn't. It's also social, and it's also logistics. And some of that's been discussed. Keep that in mind. We're not just here to do control sets. We're here to manage risk, and a lot of that is to get the people on board with the strategy and do the logistics and the social work.
Yeah, thank you. I think my recommendation is completely promotional. It's if you want to get complete visibility to the shadow IT or IT landscape of whoever you're acquiring, we have a 10-minute process, 10-minute deployment process to do so. We'll be happy to help. And either way, I wanted to thank everyone today for joining. It was a pleasure hearing you all and seeing you all again. And happy holidays until the next time we meet.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
Lior.
Thank
Well,
you, everyone.
2024, baby.
Yeah.
Bye.